Hi there. Welcome to this live session on Substack on leading through uncertainty. I'm Steve Walker. I'm a life and leadership coach and meditation teacher as well. Thanks for joining. Um, I wanted to talk about this theme. It's a part of a series that I'm doing here on Substack on integrity and leadership. And I wanted to do this session on leading through uncertainty because I think it's such a common experience for so many leaders. And yet, I don't think it gets talked about enough. And I think there's such an assumption, um, almost like a psychological need that many leaders have to appear and feel certain about everything, that it's important to recognize that there's an enormous amount of uncertainty when we're leaders. And a lot of what leadership is actually dealing with your own uncertainties and being able to lead other people through uncertainty. And so that's why I wanted to talk about leading through uncertainty today. Um, just for those of you who aren't maybe aware of my background, and the perspectives, the lenses that I'm bringing to this question of leadership, and particularly this one on uncertainty. Um, I was a Foreign Service officer, U.S. diplomat, early on in my life, um, and had leadership positions in the consulate general in Monterey. I briefly led the immigrant visa unit, which was the eighth largest, I think, um, immigrant visa unit in the world at the time. Um, in Moscow, I led two different units within the consular department, one of which I created, the Business Exchange and Governmental Visa Unit, which dealt with all the different Soviet republics as they were becoming more independent and autonomous. Um, and then uh, after the Foreign Service, I was an activist. I had quit publicly over the genocide in Bosnia, and along with my colleague at the time, Marshall Freeman Harris, uh, led the Save Bosnia activism campaign and did that for 5 years. And then I was a teacher for 25 years. And as a part of that, for 8 years, I ran an innovative lab school called the Life School, learning interdependently from experience. And so and I've been on boards of directors and advisory boards of different nonprofits as well. And I've advised leaders of nonprofits and schools and school districts um, over the years. And as a life and leadership coach, I have coached leaders, COOs and CEOs of small and medium-sized companies. Um, and I really do think this question of leading through uncertainty is a really important one because, again, I think inherent in being a leader is being able to do the strategic planning, to look into the future, to respond to crises, to deal with charting new paths, right? Taking a new perspective. You want to be someone and have people working for you who are lateral thinkers, creative thinkers. So all of that involves dealing with uncertainty. And there's a couple of different types of uncertainty, right? There's the uncertainty of um, where are we going, right? What are the objectives? What are the goals? What's the vision, right, for the future? There's the uncertainty of why. Why are we doing this, right? And which speaks to an uncertainty maybe about mission, which maybe because you never had a clear vision and mission, or maybe because um, the landscape or the organization itself has evolved, right? And the mission has not kept up with that. And then there's the uncertainty of how. You may know where you're headed and why you're headed there, but you may not have clarity about how. Maybe it's because there's been no template for this in the past, no blueprint to follow, no example to follow. Um, and certainly that was my experience as an activist, where we were trying to do something that was unprecedented. And uh, we had, I'd say, a fair amount of clarity from the beginning about what we were trying to accomplish: stop a genocide. And and the why was very self-evident, right? Um, both in terms of on a humanitarian level for wanting to stop a genocide, from a geopolitical level, not wanting to reward aggression, right? And also from a geostrategic point of view and a national interest point of view, not wanting to undermine and destabilize European security, right, for the United States. Um, so, so those were all very clear. What was uncertain was how we were going to do it. And we early on had the idea of essentially wanting to pass congressional legislation to lift an arms embargo that was on all of the former Yugoslavia, but was really affecting Bosnia. So we wanted to lift it on Bosnia. Um, but no organization or movement had ever successfully gotten Congress to pass legislation to basically repudiate a president's foreign policy, and reverse course and essentially make foreign policy that was seen as the purview of the executive branch. So we were trying to do something that really hadn't been done before. Um, and so there was tremendous uncertainty. In fact, if anything, I think everybody was around us, and people in Washington, journalists and politicians, you name it, were fairly certain we would fail. And so, um, like in some ways, that was liberating, right? Where we could say, look, we're going to figure this out as we go, and we're going to do what we feel is right, and we're going to do what we feel makes the most sense strategically for us and tactically for us. Um, but we're going to put value in fighting the good fight, and we're going to be honest about it. We're going to have integrity, um, and see where it goes. And again, the worst comes to worst, we fought the good fight, right? Somebody has to. Um, but I think there were some really powerful lessons there, right? So let's just kind of walk through this. The 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 first type of uncertainty about what you're trying to accomplish. Um, there need to be um, processes certainly built into your organization, where you are doing strategic planning on a fairly regular basis. You want to say once a year, once every 2 years, once every 3 years. Um, if you're doing that big strategic planning process, maybe it's every 3 years, right? In a lot of industries, with AI being such a disruptive force, you may be forced to do major strategic planning every 6 months because the landscape of your industry is changing so rapidly. Um, but I think for a lot of organizations and companies, you might be able to afford to do it, once every 2 or 3 years. It used to be that companies thought such long term that they were doing strategic planning once every 3 years or once every 5 years. Um, but I think now that timeline is shorter for a lot. Um, and again, I think in terms of the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish, there needs to be significant buy-in, not just amongst the leadership team, but amongst the rank and file, right? The people that you're leading. Um, because people should feel motivated and understand and and feel very positively about where you're headed, right? And I think that's important. Um, there's some industries, you could argue AI, where there's still a fair amount of uncertainty about where those companies are headed, right? Because they may even be clear about you know we're looking for developing general intelligence, right? Artificial general intelligence, AGI. Um, sure. What does that actually look like? How are we going to know when we get there? Um, there's a lot of disagreement and a lot of vagueness about it. Um, and so, even within an AI company, there may be a fair amount of uncertainty about where they're headed exactly, right? Um, so that requires a bit of a leap of faith. But even then, I think some general sense of direction is always necessary. But the more concrete you can be that says, this is where we're headed, it is going to be something that most people in the organization need to really buy into. Ideally, everybody should be buying into it. But in any particular organization, you're probably going to have some people who are there just because it's a paycheck or because they're trying to boost their resume, right? Um, but you do want a majority of the people to be invested in and believe in that bigger goal. Um, the why, similarly, is also really important to get broad buy-in on. Um, and the why is often neglected, right? There's a lot of leaders out there who lead by saying, here's where we're going, and we're going there because I said so, right? Or because our shareholders want us to. And for sure, in a privately held company or a publicly held company, that there are shareholders, owners, boards of directors that you have to deal with. But I think also the boards of directors, uh, as well as the C-suite people, um, need to be able to communicate to the rank and file why they're doing what they're doing, right? Why they're headed in that direction. Because I think that, again, enhances buy-in in the bigger objective. And it tends to raise motivation and engagement for people if they're invested in and believe in the why, right? They think it's worthwhile. They may not have the same level of fervor or commitment to the why, to the mission, but ideally the mission should, for most people, provide a significant amount of motivation, right? That when things are tough, sure, money and a bonus at the end of the year sure helps, right, with the motivation for a lot of people. But in the end, those things don't bring long-term investment in a company or an organization, or even short-term, and the sacrifices sometimes that need to be made. The creative thinking, the risk-taking. It's the why that motivates a lot of people, right? That makes them feel good about getting up in the morning and coming to work, all right? Or turning on their computer and going to work. And so the why is a really powerful tool, and it's an important piece of the strategic planning that should go on a regular basis. Um, then there's the how, right? And I think sometimes some organizations and companies are really clear about the how, but not the why and the where, right? They're going. And they just kind of are doing what they're used to be doing, and they do it well enough, and they make enough money, and that's the way they operate, right? But I think there are times where an organization or a company that is trying to be innovative, right, that is trying to chart new ground, new territory, forge a new path, where the uncertainty is going to be around the how. That's where I think it's really important that you have done the work on the where and the why, and that there's broad buy-in. And I think it's worth noting that those two pieces, where are we going and why are we going there, are going to be built on a foundation of integrity, right? that there is clarity about what this organization or this company believes in, stands for, what the values are, what the corporate culture is, right? Those things matter. And they are going to enhance your integrity, is going to enhance your reputation, your ability to gain good people, great people to work for you. It's going to determine the extent to which your customers and clients are willing to rely on you, trust in you, turn their money over for your goods or your services, right? Like that's all built on a foundation of integrity. And that integrity comes from a process, a strategic planning process that gets that clarity about who we are and what we believe in and what our values are and what we're trying to accomplish and how or why we're trying to accomplish it. And again, if those things are clear and communicated clearly, and the communication is a huge part of it, there are some companies and organizations and leaders who have clarity about their mission and vision, right? They know who they are and why they're doing what they're doing, and they know where they're headed, but they can't communicate it clearly. And that's a problem, right? That all that hard work for that mission and vision can go to waste to some extent if you can't communicate it clearly, right? And honestly and with conviction, right? With your own buy-in. But if you can put that together, the mission and the vision, and communicate it clearly, then the how and the uncertainty of the how, because you're trying to chart this new course, can be much easier to deal with and get people to tolerate, if not actually embrace. Because if people feel that clarity and conviction from you as a leader on the big picture stuff, then the how, they're more willing to take a leap of faith with you, right? And I think the how should have, if there's uncertainty around it, is going to have a much shorter time frame for kind of your strategic planning and implementation and then feedback loop, right? Almost like a design thinking loop, right? Where you brainstorm, right? And your brainstorming process, if there's uncertainty about how you're going to do what you're going to do, you really do need a design process as a part of your institutional framework and the way you operate on a regular basis, right? That you're going to identify, okay, what's the immediate and maybe midterm challenge, goal, problem that we're trying to solve, right? And once you've got clarity about that, which is important, right? That's the first thing, clarity about that. What's the short to medium term problem, objective, right, that we're trying to address? And then do your brainstorming, and you've got to have a culture where people trust each other and know each other so they can come up with creative lateral thinking ideas, right? Because oftentimes the kind of craziest, quirkiest idea is going to become the kernel of the solution, right? That you end up with. And then be able to do that brainstorming process and have a process for weighing the pros and cons of each option that you think is a viable, interesting, important option to consider, as well as not doing those things, right? Looking at both sides of it. What if we do this, but what if we don't do this? What are the pros and cons, right? So that kind of risk analysis that I teach. And then being able to prototype when appropriate, right? Or, you know, do a little test case or a trial period, right? We're going to try this for the next 2 weeks and see what happens, gather some data, right? Analyze it, identify what research we need to do. Maybe even up front after your brainstorming, you realize, oh, there are gaps in our knowledge. We need to go out and do some more research and data gathering, right? And then do some prototyping or do some testing, right? Gather the information, review it, analyze it, and then come up with a new version, maybe based on that feedback, that information, that data, right? And you go through this revision process as you go with the design process. So I think that is one of the ways that you deal with this uncertainty is that you've got clarity about the big picture, and then you have clarity about your process, and it's a process that makes sense, that is gathering more and more information as you go, more feedback, more data, and involves the opportunity to analyze it clearly, right? And thoughtfully, and use that to reiterate new prototypes, new test runs, right? To to improve each version of what you're doing or each step along the way of your new process that you're creating, right? And and that will also give people some sense of calm and confidence in where you're going and how you're trying to get there, even though the how is so uncertain, right? Because it feels like the exact how, not so sure, but we're figuring it out as we go in a very thoughtful way, in a very predictable way. Because in a way, like what you need to think about is the nervous system, right? Uncertainty is triggering to, it disrupts our nervous systems. And this is more, I think, more and more for leaders, for parents, you name it, and for each of us individually. Understanding how the nervous system works and how to regulate it is one of the most important skills that you can learn. And so, as a leader, knowing that uncertainty is going to be disruptive to other people's and your own nervous systems is hugely important. And knowing how to create conditions in which people's nervous systems are more likely to be calm and feel safe. And when they do get disrupted, how to create moments and opportunities for people to recenter and regather themselves and calm their nervous systems, right? So that's why you see a lot of corporate wellness programs being developed around mindfulness, right? And developing some sense of, you know, uh, nervous system regulation, right? Of being present, being intentional, right? Understanding how to like refocus yourself when you're distracted or agitated, right? How to manage crises effectively and calmly. Like the meditation practices, the wellness programs, a lot of those are dealing with elements of this that will help make you more resilient and better able to manage your nervous system. But as a leader, you need to make sure that you have systems in place and are communicating in such a way that you are reassuring to the nervous systems of the people who work with you. So, having a clear design process in order to figure out what our how is going to be, right? How we're going to accomplish our objectives is one way, an important way to calm people's nervous systems and create some sense of predictability, even though what you're actually doing in the work is very unpredictable at that point, right? And then I think making sure that your teams also feel safe with each other. I think that's another part of it that often gets missed. That it's particularly important, it's always important, but it's particularly important to learn and implement what Google's Project Aristotle did, whether 15 years ago or something, where they realized like, wow, the teams that know each other well as human beings and care about each other as human beings, they tend to function better because they have each other's backs and they take more intellectual risks and they innovate more and they give more honest and actionable feedback. So making sure that you've got systems as well as to figure out the how, but also systems and a culture that makes sure that people get to know each other and learn to trust each other and care about each other so that they will navigate the uncertainty with calmer nervous systems because they're surrounded by these people who they know and trust, right? That's indispensable, right? How do you navigate uncertainty if you feel like I can't trust these people. I don't know them well. I can't take any risks. I can't try new things. I got to play it safe. Like that's the opposite of what you need when things are uncertain. You need people who are going to eventually find uncertainty to be their wheelhouse. That's my comfort zone, is crisis and uncertainty, because I had to deal with it a lot early on in my life, and I learned how to navigate it. I learned not to panic, and I learned to feel calm. I actually feel calmer when the crap hits the fan, right? A year ago when I had this spinal infection out of nowhere that almost killed me and I was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, I realized like the first or second day I was in the hospital, I'm like, I got really calm. And I should have been panicked. I was really calm because I'm like, oh, I know this place. This is my comfort zone because crisis is my comfort zone, right? And you want people to feel that, but you can't just expect them to manufacture that out of nowhere, right? You've got to have faith and confidence in the people around you. You've got to have faith and confidence in the processes, and they've got to have faith and confidence in you that you're not going to try to convince them that you've got all the answers when you don't. You've got to show them that, yeah, there's uncertainty. This is when I was an activist. Sometimes grassroots activists would call up and they'd want like action right now and tell me what I can do right now and tell me exactly what we should be doing. And there were times where I was like, I don't know. We're making this up as we go, and that's okay, right? Because we know where we're headed, and we know why, and we've got thoughtful processes and good people that we trust trying to figure this out. And we're being totally honest with ourselves and everybody else about it. And we're going to do the best we can. We're fighting the good fight, right? And to be able to convey that level of calm and confidence that, yes, we're figuring this out as we go. Yes, there's an enormous amount of uncertainty here. That's okay, right? We will navigate this together. That was reassuring to people, right? And gave people the patience and the courage to keep moving forward, and empowered them, right? That they knew that they could come up with ideas too, right? And they could make suggestions. Some of them, their suggestions felt more like demands at times. But I appreciated the passion and the belief in the where we were headed and the why that led them to be so demanding at times, right? I loved that. That meant that when we had real things to do, I could count on those people to rise above and beyond what was required. And that was enormous. That gave me more confidence as a leader, right? So again, I think it's just I think it's so important to think about, like, where's the uncertainty? Is it where we're headed? Is it why we're headed there? Is it how we're headed there? Right? And if it's the first two, you need a good strategic planning process, right? It's the kind of thing I've done with a bunch of organizations and companies, and it is an exciting process. It can be really hard work, but it's really great work, right? And again, there's a certain amount of uncertainty, obviously, with that. But if you have a good process, it gives people the ability to think and imagine and come up with a mission and a vision that is really exciting for everybody, right? And then the how is, ideally you want to be in a situation where the how is the mystery, right? And the uncertainty. Right now, with AI, there should be a lot of organizations and companies that are really panicked about, about the how. But don't panic. It's okay, right? That there's a path forward to navigate that uncertainty. And it's about the processes and systems you put in place on how you figured that out and gather data and make changes and adapt as you go. You're gonna have to be very adaptable. The people and the organizations and companies that survive and thrive in the coming years and decades, those are going to be the ones that are resilient and that are adaptable and that have systems and processes in place, like I'm talking about, that will help you adapt quickly and effectively and efficiently in pursuit of your overall objectives, right? And that you're doing the strategic planning often enough that you're adjusting your mission and your vision to a rapidly changing landscape, right? Economically, technologically, politically, you name it, right? And then I think you've got to create the conditions where people can operate effectively under uncertainty. And that's a lot of transparency and honesty, right? Not trying to be the person who has all the answers, right? Which again can be reassuring and empowering to people that they can be a part of this, right? That they can be helping to figure out the how, and that their input is valued, and that they, create, again, I think, a culture and systems where people get to know each other and care about each other and trust each other, right? As a team, so that they are able to engage in this uncertainty and trying to bring clarity out of the uncertainty in ways that are innovative and powerful and maybe involve some risks sometimes. And that culture and those systems are going to pay huge dividends, which will make your shareholders happy, uh, if you invest the time and energy in these things, right? And you can create that sense of stability amidst all this uncertainty, right? Someone initially might come in and feel like, oh my God, there's so much uncertainty about how we're supposed to do this. Like, what am I doing here? But it becomes very exciting work if they know, oh, there are systems for us to figure this out together and systems for us to build powerful teams to do that innovative work. And that's the place you want to be, right? I hope that's helpful. If you're interested in learning more about, you know, the strategic planning process that I tend to take people through and organizations through, or the design process, or how to create this sense of strong teams and build trust and build your organization on integrity as well, reach out to me right here on Substack or on LinkedIn, or go to integrityandjoy.com. But thanks for tuning in today, and appreciate it, and hope to see you next week, same time, Thursdays, here on Substack, noon Eastern. I'm Steve Walker. Have a great day.